The next filmmaker I want to bring up is David Cronenberg, who I think also falls into the same category as these other filmmakers. I think when people think of David Cronenberg, of course, first they think of body horror. I don't do things with big prosthetics. I do kind of tell horror stories, but often not with a lot of on-screen violence or, I mean, props even. So I don't like a lot of props. That's kind of a Dogma 95 thing as well. They had a thing about guns in particular, actually, but I think just the notion of involving objects that you would not normally find in a scene influences the kind of story that you tell. But when it comes to David Cronenberg, I don't think it's the body horror that influences me the most. It's tone, for one, and again, it's cinematography, and it's dialogue. I think particularly in his latest film, The Shrouds, and then other films he's done like Maps to the Stars, Cosmopolis. These are the ones that influence me the most, even though they're not, you wouldn't call them like quintessential Cronenberg, but there's really strong writing in them. And there's a real bluntness and matter-of-fact nature to how those conversations are presented. I think that in the case of Cosmopolis, which came from a Don DeLillo novel, the style of how it is filmed really, to my mind, complements the writing style, which is kind of oblique and blunt and minimalist and matter-of-fact. And I really like, obviously, a matter-of-fact cinematographic style. And I think it is because where I try to place the emphasis on writing and performance, the less the camera is intruding, the more the emphasis remains on these aspects. And something about me really wants cinema to remain accessible. I think perhaps as an extension of the messages I'm trying to get across, that these are stories about, for the most part, ordinary people, ordinary circumstances. Something about the way the film is filmed, I want to be a way that anyone could do by themselves as well. It's almost like the way the story is told is not done in a flashy, only I could have done this manner, as a way of enhancing the message of the film. But I've been watching some interviews with David Cronenberg, and one of the ways that he influences me also is that he says he doesn't do rehearsals, but that Paul Schrader does. And they argue about that. And he also doesn't storyboard. I assume he has some sort of plan for how he's going to film, but the shots that he ends up with, I think, are very matter-of-fact, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, when people talk about a David Cronenberg film, you know you're seeing something unique, something that he could only uniquely do through his style, I think. But that doesn't mean that every aspect of his style needs to be really ostentatious. I think that's what I like about it. That what constitutes your style can be low-key and simple. Or as I say, you can place the emphasis in one particular place. And I think particularly when you're a new filmmaker, when people don't know you, they don't trust the reasons that you've chosen to make a film and not write a story or write a play. This is the kind of criticism you get, I think, that you don't really understand why you've gravitated towards a particular medium. And I think that kind of criticism can always get in because nobody really understands the differences between them. We have a vague understanding of what one medium can do better than another. And we know that certain mediums lend themselves better to certain types of stories than others. A superhero novel, for example, I don't think is going to be as compelling as a superhero film. The kind of flashy things are made for cinema, or video games, more so. They lean towards one particular type of artistic communication than another. But Cronenberg doesn't really seem to be bothered with the fact that if you're filming actors performing dialogue, oh, could that not just be a radio play? If the camera's not going to zoom around, if they're going to do it in a very blunt fashion, what is it that you need to see about their faces necessarily? I think I'm trying to say that Cronenberg doesn't seem like somebody who is very impacted by criticism when it comes to the types of stories he chooses to tell and how to tell them. And that kind of confidence, I think, comes with decades into a career, into a chosen career in the arts. Is perhaps not something you can just get to straight away. But I try to be inspired by that. I try to, when I make films like Faceboy, like Cherophobe, that are, in Faceboy's case, it's mostly one guy giving a monologue into the camera. There's a lot of camera techniques in that I would say justify the fact that it is a film. Same for Cherophobe, but it's a very unflashy, one guy talking to a voice in his head. But I trust that because I feel like it should be a film, that's enough, even without all of this box-ticking exercise of justifying that this is a film, it's not a filmed play, you know, it's not a radio play that we put cameras to. I say it's a film, therefore it is. I feel like Cronenberg does the same. And And that's one of the reasons that he influences me. And there's also a tonal thing that I really like about his films. That I think, again, in Mr. Sleepy particularly, we went for, also maybe Cancel Plans, where there's a tenderness towards the character, but a kind of coldness from all around, from the world itself. That's how I guess I would describe it. And it's very difficult to understand how you can evoke something like that, but Cronenberg does it very well, and I feel like we've managed to achieve it every now and then with our films, because there's something about trying to say something about life by capturing that tone, that I think that there's a tenderness that we can show one another amidst a cold, uncaring universe. And I think that Cronenberg does that well, and I try to do that every now and then in stories that it's relevant for. Last influence is one of Cronenberg's favourites himself, one of his peers, and that is the sadly late David Lynch. David Lynch is a difficult one to... I would never directly try and emulate him. I think that's a mistake, because he has such an idiosyncratic style, a very unique style. It all comes from him and who he is. That's where his chosen symbols come from, and so on. Comes from a very personal place, obviously, with him. And so therefore, if you were just to take his symbols or camera movements or techniques and say that they were yours, it would be really transparent and kind of odd, I think. So what I mainly take from David Lynch, again, is his deep faith in the correctness of what his intuition provides him. And so I try and have a very strong trust in what my intuition provides me, and believe that and love that process, and hope that as a result of loving that process, something great emerges. Because if you listen to him talk, that's how he comes up with his films. Though, of course, I think that there were some more obvious homages to his work in Cancel Plans. But in making that one and writing those scenes, first of all, of course, it was Inland Empire, for sure. To me, stands as this towering achievement of what you can do with a small budget, places you can go to, the depth of the story you can tell, the intense emotions you can evoke, using seemingly very limited resources. I don't think I would have attempted the scenes we did in Cancel Plans if I had not seen it done before in Inland Empire. That film really gave me permission to do a lot of things. And when it comes to Inland Empire, it's also embracing new technology, which he did. I think once the digital cameras came in and they kept getting better, he didn't want to return to film. He called it dirty and difficult to work with. And some people are purists about older technology and so on, but remaining open-minded about how new technology can impact what you're making is something that he did. And once again, in Inland Empire, I think Inland Empire really hammered home something I've always believed, that the most interesting thing you can point a camera at is a human face. Naturally, that would be one of the most compelling things for another human to look at. God, I really wish that was my quote, but I'm pretty sure I read it in a book of Cassavetes interviews. But it really holds true. It's nice to see films that remind you of that. If you have a good performance, good writing, and a really interesting human face to look at, you've got a film. When it comes to these filmmakers, also, I think there's a very particular use of music. In the case of Cronenberg, it's used very sparingly. In the case of David Lynch, it can be used a lot, like in Twin Peaks, but then also in Twin Peaks, in Blue Velvet, in many instances, you will see efforts for the singer, the band, to be in the film when the music is playing, because non-diegetic music is one of those things that can interrupt a feeling of realism in film. There's a famous quote I really like about Lord of the Rings. I think it was Elijah Wood was supposed to be up the side of a mountain, and they blasted his face with a big light. And that's a real problem in modern films. Everything's so bloody dark because they think that it's somehow more real that there's no light. And there has to be a limit to how little you're intruding upon your film. But in this instance with Elijah Wood, he said to the lighting guy, "Where is this light supposed to be coming from?" And the lighting guy said, "Same place as the music." So, I mean, films are ultimately fake and constructed, but there are still ways to minimize that artifice. And using music very judiciously is one of those ways. So to wrap up, I mean, what I find really interesting about these filmmakers is most of them I've come to love as an adult. I can't say I really enjoyed watching Haneke films growing up. I think they made me feel very sad about the adulthood I was working towards trying to get for myself. Like I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get good grades so I can be one of these middle-class Parisians in cachet, only to see them hate it. It's not... Or I'm going to end up like the couple in Amour, if I'm very, very lucky. It's I wouldn't say that I even appreciated the point in making films like that. I was just like, ugh. Growing up, some of my favourite films were Lost in Translation, which is somewhat of an influence, I would say, but nowhere near as big as these other filmmakers. The Steven Soderbergh Solaris, I still love. Anything by Charlie Kaufman, of course. What I think is funny about that is because, like, if younger me had seen my own films, he would be like, what the hell is this? You would be like, why did you spend all your time making this thing? And these are popular filmmakers within certain cult circles, I would say. They're not making superhero films. A lot of the techniques that they're using are anti-cinematic in a way. Like I say, they deliberately underutilize the techniques of filmmaking. And that ends up putting you in a weird place as a filmmaker, because if you're not doing interesting camera pyrotechnics when it comes to selecting a film for a festival, for example, they'd say, oh, well, anyone can just stick their camera on a tripod and point it at their friends. What's so special about this? I argue that it is special, and that not making a choice can be as much of a conscious choice as making one, just not so obviously so. And so what I like about these filmmakers is that they are trailblazers that have demonstrated this, so that I don't need to run around screaming. I know I didn't move the camera for 2 minutes, but I swear I meant not to move it, you know? I'm sorry there isn't more music, but I just thought it would interrupt the realism. But when I say anti-cinematic, by contrast, what I would consider cinematic is the principle of never feeling like you're alone, really. This is what I would call mainstream cinematic or commercially cinematic, is that each scene is exactly the length it needs to be. There's music scoring it. There's a constant connection between the scenes. There's like a symphonic movement throughout. Everything looks beautiful. Everyone looks beautiful. What they're saying has the correct balance of darkness with lightheartedness. No emotional beat is stretched too far. And so what you see these people doing is the opposite, is whatever the emotional beat is almost unclear. The scenes run for very long lengths. Sometimes there are just cuts to black between them, almost to create a fragmented feel. One of Haneke's films is called 71 Fragments of a Chronology of Chance. These are disruptive and almost deliberately unpleasant and upsetting techniques. I think that when Haneke was making the first Funny Games in Austria, I think he said to his actors, like, we're making the kind of film that's going to be more unpleasant to see than it was making it. Or something like that. I think you can find that interview. So it's certainly a bold choice to make films like that. But when your topic becomes peering behind artifice, it lends itself to kind of stripped down cinema that you see in the work of Haneke and Ackerman mostly, sometimes with Cronenberg. And there's a deliberate minimalism at times in David Lynch's work, like in Lost Highway, and in Inland Empire mostly. Sometimes I talk to other filmmakers and they get really excited about filming things in a unique way, or you even see like behind the scenes footage used to promote something that's on Netflix that's like, this is how we filmed that scene. Everyone was wondering when we watched that scene how we filmed that scene. And I tell you what, if everyone is watching your scene thinking, I wonder how they filmed that, they're not hooked by the story of the thing you're making. They're impressed by the camera techniques. And if the camera techniques are getting in the way of the story, I consider that a bad thing. I think a lot of these filmmakers becoming an influence to me was because I started working at a low budget level. I still am working at a low budget level, but I think that having done it for so many years, I just became really interested in what you can do at this level. And every time I find a new film that I can tell using the equipment I already have, I feel like I'm getting away with something and I really enjoy it. And I think that seeing the broad variety of work that these filmmakers have made over their careers makes me feel like I could work at this level forever. Though certainly every time I finish a film, I always feel like I've exhausted everything I have to say about a particular topic, but you absolutely should feel that way if you've done a good job. And I've exhausted everything I have to say on these filmmakers for now. But I'm certainly not done with this topic, and maybe I'll come back with different influences. And I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope you enjoyed Fiona and all of her interruptions, because she certainly enjoyed me making this. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching once again. And until the next video, you were so badly behaved.